The chandelier light hit the ballroom like something out of a dream, and Nellie Williams walked through it without slowing down for anyone. She had a name in this city now. Not the name on her passport. The other one. The one whispered in boardrooms from Seoul to Singapore whenever someone needed a deal saved or a rival buried in paperwork. Nellie Williams. The woman who built an empire with her own 2 hands and never once asked permission. If you're new here, do this now before the story pulls you under. Tap subscribe. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a part. Hit like. Share this with someone who loves a good story. And tell me in the comments the time and the place you're watching from. The gala was the kind of event where the poorest person in the room could buy a small country. Nellie had given her speech 20 minutes ago. Investment, legacy, building something that outlives you. They had applauded. Now she wanted 1 glass of champagne and a quiet exit. She did not get it. A hand touched her arm. Light, almost weightless. Nellie turned, ready with the polite smile she kept for strangers, and found a small Korean woman looking up at her. Silver hair pinned with the kind of precision that takes a lifetime. Eyes that did not match the softness of her face. Those eyes were doing something Nellie recognized instantly. They were measuring her. You spoke beautifully tonight, the woman said. Thank you. Walk with me. Just a moment. There was something in the voice. Not a request. Not quite a command either. Something underneath, both that made Nellie's feet move before her mind agreed. They stepped into the shadow of a marble column, away from the noise, and the woman leaned close enough that her perfume reached first. Pretend you're my son's wife. Nellie almost laughed. The sound was already climbing up her throat, the kind of laugh you give when a stranger says something absurd. Then she saw the woman's face. There was no joke in it, no senility, no confusion. There was fear, carefully buried, and beneath the fear something harder. Resolve. I think, Nellie said slowly, you have me confused with someone else. Nellie Williams, born in Atlanta, built your first company at 26, sold it at 31, and turned down 3 men richer than anyone in this room because none of them could keep up with you. The woman's mouth curved. I am not confused. Nellie's smile did not move, but something behind it sharpened. You've done your research. I do my research on everyone I am about to trust my son's life to. That word landed. Life. Look across the room, the woman said. By the windows. Do not stare. Just look. Nellie looked. He was not hard to find. He was the still point the whole room arranged itself around. Tall, dressed in black, so dark it drank the light. A glass in his hand he clearly had no intention of drinking from. People drifted near him and then thought better of it. A man in an expensive suit approached, said 3 words, and retreated like he'd touched a stove. The stranger's face never changed. It was a face built out of winter, and he was looking back at them now, at his mother, at Nellie beside her, and it was obvious from the slow narrowing of his eyes that he had no idea what was happening, only that something was, and that he did not like it. That is my son, the woman said quietly, Kang Min-jae, and by the end of this month, the people in his own family intend to remove him. Permanently. Nellie turned back. Then call the police. The police work for some of them. Then I'm very sorry for you, but I'm not the woman you're looking for. Nellie straightened. I don't do theater. I build companies. Find an actress. An actress would crumble in a week. These people smell weakness the way sharks smell blood. The woman caught Nellie's wrist. Her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. I do not need a woman who needs saving. I need a woman they cannot touch. A woman with her own power, her own name, her own money, who walks into a room and does not flinch. There is one such woman in this entire country tonight. She is standing in front of me. Across the room, Min-jae set down his glass. He was moving now, toward them, unhurried but coming. I have very little time, the woman said, and her voice dropped lower, faster. So I will be honest because women like us do not have patience for anything else. I will give you whatever you ask. Money. Doors that have never opened for anyone who looks like you. Contracts that would take you 10 years to earn on your own. Name it and it is yours. And here's the part that surprised even Nellie. She said no. I don't want your money, Nellie said. I have my own. I don't want your doors. I'll build my own. There's nothing you can put on a table that I can't get myself. She started to step back. So thank you, but no. The woman did not chase her, did not beg. She simply looked at Nellie with those measuring eyes gone suddenly tired, and for one unguarded second the matriarch vanished, and what was left was just a mother, frightened, out of moves, standing alone in a room, full of people who wanted her son dead. He is all I have, she said simply, and I am dying. I cannot protect him from the grave. I asked you because there is no one else I trust. That is all. Forgive an old woman for hoping. And something in Nellie's chest turned over, because she knew that warmth. She knew that exact blend of softness and steel. She had grown up inside it. Her own mother had it. The way she could pour love into a room and burn down anyone who threatened it in the same breath. Nellie was looking at a stranger across the world from home and seeing the woman who raised her. Her feet had stopped moving. If your heart just did the same thing Nellie's did, you already know this story has you. Do me one favor before it goes further. Hit that like button so more people find this and tell me in the comments, would you have said yes? Would you have walked away? I'm reading every single one. Mother. The voice came from behind Nellie. Low. Cold. Close. She turned and Kong Min-jae was there. And up close the winter in his face was worse, because up close you could see it was holding something back. His eyes moved from his mother to Nellie and back. Who is this? It was not a question. It was a demand. The old woman's entire face transformed. The fear vanished. The tiredness vanished. In its place bloomed a warm, delighted, absolutely shameless smile, and she reached out and took Nellie's hand and laced their fingers together like they had known each other for years. This, she said, beaming up at her son, is Nellie Williams, the most remarkable woman I have met in 10 years. Brilliant, self-made. I sat through her speech tonight and thought, finally, someone in this city worth introducing to you. She squeezed Nellie's fingers. I've been telling her all about you, Min-jae. All good things. Mostly. Min-jae's eyes moved over Nellie slowly, and there was nothing warm in them. Only calculation. He did not believe a word of it. His mother did not befriend strangers at galas. His mother did nothing without a reason buried 3 layers down, and he could see the edge of that reason now and could not yet name it. A pleasure, he said, in a voice that made clear it was not. It's mutual, Nellie said, matching his temperature exactly, and she watched one of his eyebrows move a fraction, because people did not usually answer him in his own register. Wonderful. The old woman clapped her hands once, delighted, ignoring the frost entirely. Then it settled. Nellie, you must come to dinner this weekend. The whole family will be there. All of them. Her smile did not waver, but her eyes found Nellie's and held, and underneath the brightness was the whole weight of everything she'd whispered behind the column. All of them. The wolves. Come and let them see you. Nellie should have said no again. She knew she should. The smart answer, the safe answer, the answer that let her walk out of this ballroom and back to her own clean life was no. She looked at the frightened mother wearing her own mother's face. I'd love to, Nellie said. Min-jae's jaw tightened by a degree most people would have missed. Nellie did not miss it, and as his mother beamed and the orchestra swelled and the gala carried on around them, none the wiser. The two of them stood there taking the measure of each other, neither one knowing that the old woman had just lit a fuse that ran straight to a dinner table, and that nothing either of them did for the rest of their lives would put it out. The Kong estate did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress that had learned to smile. Nellie's car came up a private drive lined with cypress trees older than the country she was born in, and at the end of it the house rose out of the dark like it had been carved from a single block of stone. Cameras turned to follow her. Men in dark suits stood at intervals along the gravel, hands folded, faces empty, watching the car the way wolves watch a deer that has wandered too far from the tree line. She had dressed for war. Deep red, the color of a woman who has no intention of disappearing into anyone's background. She stepped out of the car and a man opened the door for her without a word, and she walked into the lion's den on heels that cost more than his monthly salary and did not let her smile slip for 1 second. Inside, the dinner had already begun to gather. They were all there, just as the old woman had promised. The wolves. There was Uncle Kong Doyle, the eldest brother of Min Jae's dead father, a heavy man with soft hands and hard eyes who had wanted the family for himself for 30 years. There was his son, Kong Sung-ho, younger and sharper and hungrier, the kind of man who smiled most right before he took something from you. There were cousins and executives, and a woman named Madame Pak, who ran half the family's money and trusted no one, least of all a stranger in a red dress. They sat around a table long enough to land a plane on, and every one of them turned to look at Nellie when she entered, and every one of them did the same fast, silent arithmetic. Who is she? What is she? What does she want? How do we use her? Min Jae stood near the window, apart from all of them, exactly as he had stood at the gala. When he saw Nellie, his expression did not change, but his eyes followed her across the room, and she felt them the whole way like a hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades. Madame Kong sat at the head of the table, small, upright, radiant. She looked at Nellie coming toward her, and her whole face opened with a warmth so genuine that for a moment Nellie forgot the woman was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her own family. "Nellie," the old woman said, rising, taking both of Nellie's hands. "You came." "I said I would. Sit beside me." A pause, and then with the lightest mischief, for now. Nellie sat. The dinner began. Servants moved like ghosts. The conversation was all silk on the surface and knives underneath, the way these dinners always were. Uncle Doyle asked Nellie polite questions designed to find the soft place to push. She answered every one of them without giving him a single thing. Sung-ho watched her over his wine with a smile that never reached his eyes. Madame Pak said almost nothing and missed nothing. And then between the third course and the fourth, when the wine had loosened the table just enough and every wolf in the room had decided the stranger was a curiosity and nothing more, Madame Kong set down her glass. And she stood. The conversation died by degrees, the way it does when people slowly realize the host is on her feet. One by one the faces turned. Min Jae by the window went very still. "I have an announcement," the old woman said, and her voice carried, light and clear, into every corner of that enormous room. "I have kept it quiet because I am old, and old women are allowed their secrets. But you are my family, and the time has come for you to know." She reached down and took Nellie's hand and drew her up out of the chair to stand beside her. Nellie's heart was going like a war drum. Her face showed none of it. "This is Nellie Williams." The old woman's smile was beatific. Her eyes were steel. "And she is my son's wife." The room did not gasp. It went silent, completely, totally silent, the kind of silence that has a sound of its own, a high, thin ringing in the ears. A fork stopped halfway to a mouth. Madame Pak's wine glass paused in the air. Uncle Doyle's soft hands flattened slowly against the tablecloth, and every head in the room turned, not to Nellie but to Min Jae, who had not moved, who was looking at his mother with an expression Nellie had not seen on him yet, because it was the first time she had watched him be genuinely, completely blindsided. For 1/2 of 1 second the winter cracked, and underneath it was pure white shock, and Nellie understood with absolute clarity that he had not known, that his own mother had told him nothing, that he was finding out he had a wife at the exact same moment as the men who wanted him dead. And then she watched him do something that made her understand, finally, exactly what kind of man she had agreed to stand beside. He put the mask back on. In the space of a breath the shock was gone, buried so deep you would swear you'd imagined it, and Kong Min Jae set down whatever was in his hand and crossed the room toward her, unhurried, calm, the picture of a man walking toward a wife he had always had. The wolves watched him come. He stopped at Nellie's side. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and in his eyes was a message meant only for her, cold and clear and furious. "Do not embarrass me. We will discuss this when they are gone." She gave him the smallest smile. "Try and keep up." "Darling," he said for the table. "You're late." Traffic, she said, darling. And he put his hand at the small of her back, and the warmth of it went straight through the red silk, and across the table Uncle Doyle began slowly to clap. The rest of them followed, because what else could they do? The applause was thin and poisonous, and not one set of hands, and it meant a word. And over the sound of it, Madame Kong lowered herself back into her chair, looking like a woman who had just won something. The wolves smiled and clapped, and behind every smile a new calculation had already begun. He is not alone anymore. That changes everything. That changes everything. The dinner ended the way these things do, in cold courtesy and colder goodbyes, and one by one the cars pulled away down the Cypress Drive, carrying men who had arrived certain of one thing and were leaving certain of nothing. Nellie stood in the great stone hall and watched the taillights go and felt the adrenaline finally start to drain out of her hands. Then a door closed somewhere behind her, hard, and she knew the performance was over and the reckoning had arrived. My study. Min-jae's voice. Behind her, flat as a blade, laid on a table. Now, the study was all dark wood and dim light and books no one had read. He shut the door. He turned, and the calm he had worn for the wolves was gone, peeled clean off, and what stood in front of Nellie now was something colder and far more dangerous. How much? He said. Excuse me. My mother. How much did she offer you? He came a step closer. Money. Status. A merger. What was the number, Miss Williams? Name it, because I will double it for you to be gone by morning, and we end this insane thing tonight before it costs me my life. And Nellie Williams folded her arms and tilted her head, and looked the most feared man in Korea dead in the eye. You think I'd do this for money? Something flickered across his face. Look at me, she said low and even. Look at the dress. Look at the watch. Look at the car your man parked outside. I have my own money, Mr. Kong. More than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Your mother offered me everything you just listed, and I told her no to all of it, to her face, an hour before she put my hand in yours. Nellie stepped closer now, closing the gap he had opened, because she had never in her life been backed up by anyone, and she was not about to start. So no, not the money. Try again. For a long moment, he said nothing at all, and Nellie watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, watched him reach for the answer that made sense. She wants something. Everyone wants something, and watched him fail to find it, because for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was looking at a person who genuinely, provably, wanted nothing from him. It did not soften him. It unsettled him, which was worse. Then why, he said, and for the first time the cold cracked just slightly into something that was almost not quite human. Why would you walk into a room full of people who would kill you to get to me, for a woman you met last night, for nothing? And Nellie was quiet for a moment. Because she's dying, she said, and she's terrified, and she loves you so much she was willing to beg a stranger to keep you alive. She held his eyes. I have a mother like that, so I know exactly what it costs a woman like her to ask, and I couldn't walk away from it. That's the whole reason. There isn't another one. The silence in the study changed. Min-jae looked at her for a long, long moment, and whatever he had been braced for, it was not the truth, and the truth had landed somewhere he did not have a defense built for. This doesn't change anything, he said at last, but the blade had gone out of his voice. We are not friends. We are not married. This is a war, and you have just made yourself a target in it, and I did not agree to protect you. I didn't ask you to, Nellie said. I can protect myself. You have no idea what these people are. Then I suppose, she said, picking up her bag, walking past him toward the door, you'd better keep up, darling. And she left him standing there in the study full of unread books. The most feared man in Korea, completely, thoroughly unable to decide whether he had just acquired his greatest liability or the only ally he had ever had. Tell me in the comments who you think is more dangerous right now, Nellie or Min-jae. Subscribe and ring the bell and smash that like if you already know these two are going to burn the whole conspiracy to the ground together. She came to the estate 3 days later, in the early afternoon, with everything she owned that mattered packed into 4 matched cases and a single locked trunk that 2 of the men in dark suits eyed like it might be a bomb. It was not a bomb. It was her life, the portable version of it, the laptop that ran an empire, the files no cloud was ever going to hold. A photograph of her mother in a silver frame, face down on the top, so no one would see it before she decided who was allowed to. The car came up the long cypress drive, and this time the house did not look like a fortress that had learned to smile. In daylight it just looked enormous and cold, all that pale stone soaking up the sun and giving nothing back. Nellie stepped out before the driver could come around, because she had opened her own car doors for 31 years, and was not going to stop now that the audience had gotten dangerous. A small cluster of staff waited at the top of the steps. House staff, in the dark uniforms with the white collars, hands folded, faces carefully blank. They had been told a wife was coming. They had not been told what to make of her. One of them, an older woman with kind, tired eyes, came down the steps first and reached for the heaviest case before Nellie could lift it herself. "I have it," Nellie started. "Please." The woman's English was careful and soft. "It is my job, and those steps are not kind to good shoes." A small flick of her eyes toward Nellie's heels, the faintest warmth under the blankness, gone again at once. Nellie let her take it, not because she could not carry her own case, because the woman had offered her something real in a house that ran on fear, and you did not slap away the only warm hand in the building on your first day. She caught the woman's name from the little stitch tag at her collar, filed it away the way she filed everything, and said thank you using it. The woman's hands paused on the case for half a second. Then she carried on up the steps, and something had passed between them that neither of them named. Two younger maids took the rest, murmuring to each other, and the small procession of Nellie's life went up into the house ahead of her. She followed it through the great doors, and the cold of the place closed over her like water. They gave her the east wing, and the east wing had cameras in the hall. Nellie found the first one within an hour of moving in, tucked into the crown molding above her door, a small black eye that did not blink. She found the second over the staircase and the third angled at the garden doors, and by nightfall she had counted 9, and she understood the message in every one of them. You are not a guest. You are a thing we are watching. Smile for the lens. So she smiled for the lens. She unpacked like a woman who belonged there. She walked the halls like she owned them. When a maid brought her tea she had not asked for, Nellie thanked her by name, because she had learned the woman's name in the first 10 minutes, which was more than anyone else in that house had ever bothered to do. Word of that traveled below stairs faster than any camera could carry it. By the second day the staff had quietly, privately, decided they liked her. In a house run on fear, that was a kind of power, and Nellie knew it. Min-jae did not. The first week was a war fought in small rooms, and the first room was the breakfast room. He came in already irritated, which she was learning was simply his face before coffee. He set a single sheet of paper down in front of her beside her plate, the way another man might set down divorce papers. Our story, he said. Memorize it. We met 8 months ago in Singapore at a private dinner hosted by the Choi Group. We were introduced by a mutual associate. We courted quietly to protect your business interests. We married in a small civil ceremony 6 weeks ago. That is what we say. Every time, word for word. Nellie picked up the sheet. She read it. She set it back down, picked up her knife, and went on buttering her toast. No, she said. He went still. No, it's a bad story. It's got fingerprints all over it. The Choi dinner in Singapore 8 months ago, I was there. That part's fine, except half your uncle's executives were there too, and not one of them remembers seeing me anywhere near you because I wasn't. You hand them a date and a place. You hand them something to check. And they will check. She pointed the knife lightly at the paper. Rule 1. Never give a liar a detail he can verify. You give him a feeling he can't. A feeling. We don't tell them when we met. We act like it's nobody's business, and we're a little amused they asked. People believe the thing you won't explain far faster than the thing you over-explain. You wrote me a paragraph. A real wife would give them a look and change the subject. My family does not accept being told something is none of their business. Your family accepts it from you. You just don't make them, because deep down you still want their approval. That landed harder than she meant it to. His jaw tightened. You have known me 11 days. I read people for a living, Mr. Kong. I bought 3 companies last year off nothing but what the owners wouldn't say in the room. She finally looked up at him, and her voice dropped the edge just slightly. Your story isn't bad because you're stupid. It's bad because you built it to survive an audit. I'm telling you how to build one that survives people. Those are different skills. You have one. I have the other. That's the entire reason your mother put us in the same house. He looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he picked it up, folded it once, and put it in his pocket. We will use your version, he said, like the words physically pained him. Was that so hard? Yes. And Nellie almost laughed and caught it just in time because laughing would have told him something she was not ready to tell him yet. The second war was about the staff, and it was worse because it was about who they both were. He found her in the kitchen on the 5th evening. Not the dining room. The kitchen, sleeves pushed up, sitting on a stool at the steel counter while the cook's daughter, a girl of maybe 9, showed her how to fold a dumpling and laughed at how badly Nellie did it. The staff froze when Min-jae walked in. The girl went white. Her mother reached for her. Leave us, Min-jae said, and the room emptied in seconds, the way rooms always emptied for him, and the laughter went out of it like air out of a punctured thing. Nellie stayed on her stool. That was unnecessary. You cannot be in here. Why not? Because they are staff. Because in 3 weeks you will be gone, and they will still be here, and a wife who eats in the kitchen and learns their children's names is a wife people remember and talk about. And we do not want to be remembered or talked about. We want to be a closed door. You are making yourself into a story. I'm making myself into a person they'd lie for, Nellie said. There's a difference, and you've never once in your life needed to learn it, so let me teach you for free. She stood now slowly. Your uncle has the executives. Your uncle has the rivals. You know who your uncle doesn't have? The woman who brings your tea. The man who drives your car. The girl who was just folding dumplings before you walked in and frightened her half to death. Those people see everything in this house, and they are invisible to every wolf in it, because men like your uncle have never once in their lives learned a servant's name. He stared at her. You're building a fortress of fear, she said. I'm building a network of people who'd warn me before they'd warn him. One of those things has saved more lives than the other. I promise you that. And when you leave, then they'll have been treated like human beings for a few weeks by somebody, and that costs you nothing, and it might save your life before I go. You really came in here to tell me that kindness is a tactical error. She tilted her head. No wonder you're lonely. It came out before she could stop it, and it was too true, and they both heard it. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and raw, gone almost before it arrived. He did not answer. He turned and left the kitchen. 10 minutes later, the cook's daughter crept back in, peeked around the door, and found Nellie still there. Is it safe? The girl whispered. Come here, Nellie said. You were about to show me the pleated edge. And from the hall, where he had not quite managed to walk all the way away, Min-jae stood in the dark and listened to a child laugh in his kitchen for the first time in 15 years, and did not understand the thing it did to his chest. The third war was the worst, because it was the one where he was almost right. You will decline it, he said. They were in the upstairs corridor, voices low under the cameras. He had a newspaper in his hand. Her face was on the 3rd page of it, beside the words, New Philanthropic Board. The foundation seat she had been offered weeks before she ever met him. I accepted it this morning, Nellie said. Then unaccept it. It puts your face in every paper in the country. It puts a spotlight on exactly the person we need to keep in shadow. You are supposed to be a quiet wife protecting a quiet marriage, and instead you are on page 3 smiling at 3 million readers, half of whom work for people who want me dead. The seat was offered to Nellie Williams. Investor, it has nothing to do with you. If I suddenly decline a board seat I've been chasing for a year, the day after marrying you, that is the story. That is the thing people notice. A woman who disappears the moment she marries a Kong. Now that is a woman with something to hide. He paused. It was a good point, and he hated that it was a good point. It is still a risk, he said. Everything is a risk. You want to talk to me about risk? I have spent my entire career being the only person who looks like me in every room I walk into, which means I have never once had the option of being invisible. I learned to win loud because quiet was never on the table for me. Her voice rose just enough. You keep trying to make me small to keep me safe, and I keep telling you, small is the most dangerous thing I could possibly be. The day I shrink is the day they smell it. This is not your boardroom. People do not get fired here. They disappear. I know exactly where I am, she snapped. I walked in with my eyes open. Don't you dare stand there and act like I wandered into this. Your mother asked, and I looked at a dying woman who reminded me of my own. And I said yes with full knowledge of every single thing you're trying to scare me with right now. So do not manage me, Min Jae. I have never in my life needed a man to decide what I can survive. The corridor rang with it. He looked at her for a long beat, and then quietly, not backing down but not pushing either, he said, My father died because someone he trusted decided to be visible at the wrong moment. That is the only reason I am asking. Not because I think you are weak. It stopped her cold. It was the first true thing he had ever volunteered about himself, and it had cost him to say it, and she knew that. Then we do it carefully, she said, gentler now. I take the seat. You and I manage the exposure together. You don't get to decide it alone, and I don't get to ignore that you've buried a father. We split the difference. That's what partners do. Partners. The second time she had used it. He noticed it the second time too. Fine, he said. Fine, she said. And they stood there in the corridor a moment too long, neither one walking away first, until the absurdity of it caught them both, and he turned for his study, and she for her wing, and neither of them smiled until they were sure the other could not see. The first real crack came on a Tuesday, and neither of them saw it coming. There was a function, a wretched, glittering thing the family attended every year, and the family attended together, which meant the new wife had to be on Min Jae's arm and the performance had to be flawless. They had rehearsed nothing. They had refused to rehearse, both too proud to practice being in love. So they walked in cold, and the wolves were already there watching, and Uncle Doyle was already smiling his soft, terrible smile, and Sung-ho was already drifting toward them with a glass in his hand and a question in his mouth, designed to break them open in public. How did you two meet? Sung-ho asked, all warmth, all teeth. I've heard 3 different stories. I'd love to hear the real one. It was a trap, a clean one. Any 2 people who had actually fallen in love would have a single story, worn smooth from telling. 2 strangers would stumble. Nellie felt Min Jae go very slightly rigid beside her, felt him reaching for a line, and she knew, whatever he said would be one beat too careful, so she did not let him answer. She laughed, a real laugh, warm and a little wicked, and she put her hand flat on Min Jae's chest and leaned into him like the question was delightful. Oh, he'll tell it wrong, she said. He always tells it wrong. He likes to pretend he wasn't rude to me. He was extremely rude to me. She turned to Min Jae, eyes bright, daring him. Weren't you, darling? Tell him how rude you were. And Min Jae, who had been bracing for a lie, suddenly did not have to tell one, because she had handed him the truth and dressed it up as a love story. He looked down at her hand on his chest, and at her face turned up to his, and something in him caught up to the moment and decided to play. I was not rude, he said. I was reserved. He was rude. She spoke to me, Min Jae told Sung-ho, like I was no one at all, in a room where everyone else speaks to me like I might have them shot. A pause. The faintest, most dangerous thing crossed his face, and Nellie realized with a small jolt that it was almost true. I had never met anyone unafraid of me. I found I could not stop thinking about it. Sun-ho's smile thinned. The trap had closed on nothing. He drifted away to report failure to his father, and Nellie let out a breath she had not known she was holding, and realized her hand was still on Min Jae's chest, and that he had not moved it, and that for a moment back there neither of them had been acting at all. She took her hand back. He let her. Neither of them said anything about it. But in the car home, in the dark, with the city sliding past the windows, Min Jae said quietly, "Thank you for the save." And Nellie said, "That's what partners do," and watched the word land on him. Partners watched him turn it over in the dark, and neither of them corrected it. They thought the marriage would crack the family open along its weak seam. Instead, it forced the wolves to do the one thing they had never managed in 30 years of circling each other. It made them cooperate. Uncle Doyle went to the rival families, the ones the Kangs had spent a generation holding at the throat, and he offered them the unthinkable. A door left open, a guard sent home early, a shipment misrouted. Sung-ho went to the executives, the ambitious men who ran the family's clean businesses and resented the dirty hand that owned them, and he whispered that a new era was coming. One where the old blood was gone and the smart money ruled. And Madame Pak, who trusted no one, sat in the middle of it all and counted, because she had decided that whichever way the knife fell, she intended to be holding the handle. Their plan was patient, and it was clever, and it was aimed at one thing. Not Min Jae's life. His name. They would not kill the heir. They would prove him unfit, disloyal, compromised, in front of the one body that could strip him of everything. The leadership council. The old men who held the real power, who could remove a head of family with a show of hands, and who were gathering in 3 weeks for the summit they held once a year. They would destroy him there, in the open, by the rules. And the new wife, the strange foreign wife who had appeared from nowhere, was going to be the proof. A plant, a spy, a weakness dressed in red silk. All they needed was the evidence. And if it did not exist, Sung-ho was perfectly willing to make some. Nellie found out because the staff loved her. The cook's daughter's mother, the woman whose name Nellie had learned in the first 10 minutes, came to her room late one night, frightened half to death, and told her she had overheard Sung-ho on the phone in the library, talking about documents, about photographs, about a foreigner who would hang herself with her own past if they pulled the right thread. The woman did not understand most of it. She understood enough to be afraid for the person who had been kind to her. So she came. Nellie did not panic. Nellie had not panicked since she was 19 and decided it was a waste of time. She thanked the woman, made sure she was safe, sent her back unseen. And then she sat in the dark for exactly 4 minutes, thinking the way she thought before a hostile acquisition, cold and clear, and 3 moves ahead. Then she got up, crossed the dark house in bare feet, and went to find her husband, because this was bigger than the both of them, and he needed to know tonight. She did not knock. She pushed open the door to his rooms, and she was already talking. "We have a problem. Sung-ho was on the phone in the library, and then she stopped, because the words ran straight off the edge of her brain and did not come back. He was standing by the window with his back half to her, and he had just come out of the shower, and he was not wearing a shirt. He was, in fact, wearing very little above the waist of his trousers at all, and the lamplight was doing something deeply unfair across a set of shoulders and a back that the cold, dark suits had been generously hiding this entire time. Whatever Nellie had been about to say evaporated. She stood in the doorway, and her eyes did a slow, traitorous, entirely involuntary trip from his shoulders down and back up again, and her mouth stayed slightly open with no sound coming out of it. Min Jae turned around, unhurried. He had heard the door. He had heard her stop talking, and he watched her eyes finish their journey and snap back up to his face a half-second too late, and the corner of his mouth, that cold mouth that never moved, curved. "You were saying," he said. "Put on a shirt," Nellie said. "You walked into my room." "Put on a shirt, Min Jae." "You didn't knock." He had not moved toward the shirt that lay on the bed 3 feet from him. If anything, he had relaxed, one shoulder against the window frame, watching her with open, unfamiliar amusement. A man who had just discovered he was holding a card he did not know he had. "You came running through my door in the middle of the night, and now you cannot seem to remember a single word you wanted to say. Should I be worried about you, Miss Williams? You should put on a shirt, is what you should do." "I'm comfortable." "I'm not." Clearly, the curve of his mouth deepened into something that was almost devastatingly a smile. He pushed off the window frame and took one slow step toward her, and she absolutely did not step back on principle, even though every cell in her body suggested it. "Tell me something." The unshakable Nellie Williams, who stared down my entire family at dinner and did not blink, who told the most feared man in Korea to keep up. She walks into a room, sees me, and forgets how to speak. Another step. Are you tripping, Nellie? Right now. Over me? I am not tripping. You're tripping a little. I came here on business. He was close now, close enough that she had to tip her chin up, close enough that the warmth came off him in the cool room. His voice dropped, low and unforgivably pleased with itself. Are you falling for me, wife? Is that what this is? After all the speeches about partners and tactics, 3 weeks, and the great Nellie Williams cannot keep her eyes to herself. And here's the thing about Nellie. You could fluster her for exactly 8 seconds. Then she remembered who she was. She closed the last of the distance herself, the way she always closed distances, and she put one finger flat in the center of that bare chest, and she looked up at him with her composure clicking back into place like a magazine into a pistol. Darling, she said sweetly, if I were falling for you, you'd be the last person on earth I'd tell. And you certainly wouldn't find out because of a shirt. Now, are you going to keep fishing, or are you going to put on something with sleeves and listen to me? Because there are men in this house planning to destroy you at the summit, and I would hate for you to die shirtless and smug. For a second, he just looked down at her, at the finger on his chest, at her face 2 inches under his, and the amusement in his eyes shifted into something quieter and far more dangerous to both of them. Then he stepped back. He picked up the shirt. He put it on slowly, without once breaking the look, every button a small act of negotiation. And Nellie kept her eyes locked on his and refused to let them drop again. Better, he said, marginally. Sit down, he said, and gestured to the chairs by the cold fireplace, and the flirt drained out of his voice, and the strategist came back. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Leave nothing out. And for the first time, he did not say it like a man giving an order. He said it like a man asking a partner. She sat. She told him everything. And somewhere in the long hours that followed, the two of them bent over the same problem in the same lamplight. The war they had been fighting against each other quietly turned into a war they were fighting side by side. If you are as deep in this as I am right now, show it. Hit that like button. It tells me to keep making stories like this one. Subscribe and ring the bell so you are there when the summit drops. And tell me in the comments, do you think Nellie and Min-jae can pull this off, or are they walking into a trap they can't escape? I want to hear it. What followed was 3 weeks of 2 strategic minds learning what they could do together. He knew the family. She knew how money moved and where it hid and how to make a man's own paper trail into a noose. He had access no outsider could ever buy. She could read a balance sheet the way other people read faces, and she could read faces too. Late at night, when the cameras were the only things awake, they sat in the one room he had swept clean of every microphone, and they worked. And the working changed things. It is hard to plan a war with someone for 3 weeks and keep them at arm's length. She learned that he took his coffee bitter and his silences seriously, that the cold was armor and not the man, that under it was someone who had been alone so long he had stopped expecting anything else. He learned that her confidence was not a performance, that she had built it brick by brick out of every room that had tried to make her small, that when she laughed for real it sounded nothing like the laugh she used on his family. One night she fell asleep over the documents, mid-sentence, and he did not wake her. He sat across from her and watched her sleep and did not move for an hour. And he thought about the fact that for the first time in years he had stopped scanning a room for exits. And he understood that the reason was sleeping across from him with ink on her hand, and it frightened him more than anything his uncle had ever planned. Neither of them said it, but the pretending had quietly, completely run out, and what was left underneath it was real, and they both knew, and neither one was ready. They built the trap to look like the trap that was already being built for them. Nellie let Sung-ho find exactly what he wanted to find. She let a thread hang loose, a document that seemed to prove she was hiding something, a meeting that looked like a betrayal, breadcrumbs laid down for a hungry man to follow. Sung-ho followed everyone. He took his treasure to his father, and Uncle Doyle took it to the rivals and the executives, and they sharpened it into a blade and carried it to the summit, certain gloating, sure they were about to cut the head off the family and split the body between them. They did not know that every document Sung-ho had found, Nellie had planted. That every step of the path to her supposed guilt led, if you followed it one step further than they had, straight back to their own crimes. That she had spent 3 weeks building not her own gallows but theirs, and dressing it up to look like hers, so they would carry it into the one room where it could destroy them. They walked into the summit, holding the knife by the blade, and they had no idea. The leadership council met in a room without windows, under a ceiling of black wood, around a table that had sat in that family for 100 years and had 100 years of blood soaked quietly into the grain of it. Old men sat along its length, the real power, the ones who could end a reign with a raised hand. Min-jae sat at the head because he was still, for now, the head. Nellie sat at his side in red because she had decided long ago that if she was going to walk into the room where they meant to destroy her, she would not do it in a color that apologized. Uncle Doyle rose first, and he was magnificent, you had to give him that. He spoke of loyalty and of blood and of a family grown careless. He spoke of an heir who had let a stranger into the heart of everything, a foreign woman with a hidden past and hidden purposes. And then he laid Nellie's planted breadcrumbs on the ancient table, one by one, and the old men leaned in and the room turned cold, and Sung-ho could not quite keep the smile off his face. "She is a spy," Doyle said into the silence. "My nephew has been compromised by his own wife. He is unfit. I move that the council remove him tonight." A murmur ran down the table. Hands began slowly to think about rising, and Nellie Williams stood up. "May I?" she said. It was not really a question, and she did not wait for an answer. She walked the length of that 100-year-old table, unhurried, the only woman in the room, the only outsider, the only one not born to this, and she did not flinch under a single one of those ancient stares, because she had given far more frightening presentations to far more powerful rooms, and walked out with the deal every time. "My husband's uncle has presented you with a story," she said. "It's a good story. It should be. I wrote most of it." The murmur stopped. "Every document on this table I made sure he found. Every meeting that looks like my betrayal I arranged for him to see. I did it because I needed him to be confident. I needed all of them confident enough to bring what they've done into this room, in front of you, where it cannot be buried." She set her own folder on the table and opened it and began to lay down pages of her own. "So while you were looking at me, let me show you what I was looking at." And then, with the same cold clarity she brought to a boardroom, she took them apart. The shipment Uncle Doyle had misrouted to the rival families, with the dates, with the manifests, with his own signature buried 3 documents deep where he thought no one would dig. The accounts Sung-ho had been bleeding for 2 years, dressed as expenses, traced now in a clean, bright line straight to his hand. The meetings, the real ones, the ones between a Kong uncle and the family's oldest enemies, photographed, dated undeniable. And Madame Pak's careful, neutral, treacherous arithmetic, the ledger of a woman who had been quietly preparing to fund whichever traitor won. She laid it all down, page after page, and she did not raise her voice once, and the room got quieter and quieter and quieter, and the old men's eyes moved from the pages to Uncle Doyle and did not move back. It was Min-jae who delivered the last of it, rising to stand beside her, laying down the proof only he could have gotten, the testimony of men inside the rival families who had agreed to talk because the heir of the Kangs had reached them first and offered them a better future than the one Doyle had promised. And then the 2 of them stood there together at the head of the 100-year table, side by side, and let the room understand what it was looking at. Not a compromised heir and his spy wife. A united front that had seen the whole conspiracy coming and walked it, smiling, into the one trap from which there was no escape. The alliance of wolves did what wolves do when the hunt turns. It tore itself apart. Sung-ho, panicking, blurted that it had been his father's idea. Doyle, snarling, said his son had begged to be included. Madame Pak, seeing the arithmetic resolve at last, calmly offered the council everything she knew about both of them in exchange for her own life. Years of patient, hidden betrayal came down in a single night, in a single room, in a matter of minutes, because the thing that had held it together was the belief that Min-jae stood alone. And he did not stand alone anymore. When the council's hands finally rose, they did not rise against the air. They rose against the men who had tried to take him. By the time the windowless room emptied, Uncle Doyle's 30-year war was over, Sunho was finished, and Kong Min-jae sat more firmly at the head of his family than he had ever sat in his life. He had not raised a hand to do it. His wife had handed it to him, gift-wrapped, with the bow tied by their enemy's own fingers. If that ending to the summit gave you chills, you have to let me know. Smash that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. I read every single one. And if you have somehow not subscribed yet after all that, now is the time. The house was different after the summit. The cameras came down. The men in dark suits on the gravel answered to Min-jae alone now, and the halls that had watched Nellie like a captured thing simply let her pass. The war was over, which meant the marriage was over too, because the marriage had only ever been a weapon in that war, and a war that is one has no further use for its weapons. Nobody said it. They did not have to. Nellie began quietly to pack. It took less time than she expected. She had come with very little, because she had meant to leave easily, and now that the leaving was here, she found it was not easy at all, and she was furious with herself about that. She folded the red dress last. She stood in the east wing with the camera mounts empty above the door, and she told herself this was the plan. This had always been the plan. She had come to help a dying woman protect her son, and the son was protected, and the debt was paid, and there was nothing left to stay for. She almost believed it. She went to say goodbye to Madame Kong first, because the old woman was the reason she had come, and she found her in the garden, smaller than before, the illness moving in her now in a way that could no longer be hidden, but her eyes as sharp as ever. The matriarch took Nellie's hands in both of hers, the same way she had at the dinner, the same way she had the night she changed everything. "You did what I asked," the old woman said, "and more. You gave him back his family." A long look, those measuring eyes soft now. "The question is whether you noticed what he gave you." Nellie did not answer that. She kissed the old woman's cheek, and she held her a moment longer than goodbye required, because she had come for a stranger who wore her mother's face, and she was leaving someone she loved. Then she went to find Min-jae to say the last goodbye, the one she was dreading. He was in the study. Of course he was. The room where they had first fought, and then planned, and then, somewhere in between, become something neither of them had words for. "My car's here," Nellie said from the doorway. "I wanted to," she stopped. "Started again. It's done. You're safe. Your mother's safe. So, he said. "So, I'm going home." He did not say anything for a moment. He stood up from behind the desk, and he came around it, and he stopped a careful distance from her, the same distance he had kept that first night when he had asked her how much she cost. "How much?" he said. Nellie blinked. "What?" "The first night. I asked you how much my mother offered you to stay." His voice was very even, and underneath the evenness was something working hard to stay buried and failing. "I find I want to ask a different question now." "How much?" "To not go." "Min-jae." "I have a great deal of money," he said. "More than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. You taught me that line. I am offering all of it. Name the number that keeps you in this house, and it is yours." And Nellie understood that he was doing the only thing he knew how to do, that a man who had been alone his whole life and had finally found the one person who frightened the loneliness away was reaching for the one language he trusted. Money, leverage, the deal, because he did not know how to say the true thing. So she said it for him. "You can't buy me," she said softly. "You never could. You knew that the first night." She took a step toward him, closing the careful distance, the way she always closed it. "There's no number, Min-jae. There's only the truth. So try the truth." He looked at her for a long moment. The cold man, the feared man, the man who had never in his life said a soft thing out loud. "At some point," he said, "I stopped pretending. It came out quiet. It came out like it cost him everything. And then it was said, and it could not be unsaid, and he stood there having finally, after a lifetime, told someone the truth about what was in him." Nellie smiled. The real one. The one that sounded nothing like the laugh she used on his family. "Good," she said, "because I stopped first." Here is what Nellie Williams did not expect. She expected the confession to be the ending. Two people admit the truth, the music swells, the screen goes dark. That is how it goes in the stories. But a confession is not a relationship, and Nellie had built enough things in her life to know the difference between signing the deal and doing the work. So when Min-jae cupped her face in that lamplit study and very nearly kissed her, she put two fingers gently against his mouth and stopped him. No, she said. The panic that crossed his face was so fast and so human that she almost relented. No, not like this. Not as the grand finale of a war. She lowered her hand. I have spent 6 weeks being your wife on paper, in front of people who wanted us dead, in a marriage your mother arranged before either of us agreed to it, and somewhere in there it stopped being fake. Fine, I'll say it. It stopped being fake for me a while ago. But I am not going to seal it with a kiss and call it love. I have never in my life gotten the real version of anything. Not the easy way, not the given way. I built everything I have brick by brick. She looked up at him steadily. So if you want me, Kong Min-jae, you don't get to keep me. You have to win me. Properly. From the beginning. Like I'm a woman you just met and cannot stop thinking about. He stared at her like she had proposed a hostile takeover of his own heart, which, in a sense, she had. You want me, he said slowly, to court my own wife. I want you to court the woman I actually am, not the one your mother installed in the East Wing. A small, wicked curve of her mouth. I want dinners where nobody is trying to poison anyone. I want you to be nervous. I want to be asked. I have earned being asked. And the most feared man in Korea, who could end a life with a phone call, looked at the one person on earth who would not simply be his, and felt something he had not felt in 20 years. He felt like he had something to prove, and he found, to his complete astonishment, that he wanted to. Then have dinner with me, he said. Friday. Just us. No family. No cameras. No war. I'll think about it, Nellie said and walked out and sent her car away the moment she reached the drive because she had no intention of leaving, and they both knew it. But a woman has to keep a man slightly off balance, or what is even the point? He was terrible at it at first, and it was wonderful. The first dinner, he booked out an entire restaurant, the whole thing, every table empty but theirs, because that was the only way a man like him knew how to make something private. Nellie took one look at the cavernous, silent room and laughed until she had to sit down. This is not romantic, she said. This is a hostage situation with candles. It is exclusive. It is lonely. Min-jae, the entire point of going out is the going out. The noise, the other people, the waiter who hates his job. You've never actually been on a date, have you? He was quiet a moment, and then, with the particular dignity of a powerful man admitting a small truth. No. Okay. Nellie stood and held out her hand, and he looked at it like it might be a trick. Come on. I'm taking you somewhere with a line. She took him to a night market. The most feared man in Korea, in a plain dark coat with the collar up, ate fish cakes standing up under a string of paper lanterns while a vendor shouted at the crowd and a child stepped on his very expensive shoes and a couple argued, happily, 3 feet away. He did not know what to do with his hands. He did not know how to stand in a line. Nellie watched him be, for the first time in his adult life, simply a man among other men, anonymous, unimportant, free, and she watched the armor he had worn since his father died loosen one notch, and then another. Good, she asked, around her own mouthful. The food is street food. The hygiene is questionable. There are 900 people. He considered, it is the best night of my life. And he said it without irony, looking right at her, and Nellie had to look away at the lanterns for a moment because her eyes had inconveniently filled. After that, he learned fast, the way he learned everything. He took her to the coast, a quiet place far from the family's reach, and they walked a cold beach with their shoes in their hands, and he told her, in pieces, over miles of sand, the things he had never told anyone, about his father, about being 12 and suddenly the most important person in a room full of dangerous men, about the loneliness he had stopped calling loneliness because he had assumed it was simply the price of the chair. She took him to her world, too, flew him to a deal she was closing in another country, and let him watch her work, watch her walk into a hostel room and bend it, quietly to her will, and she saw him watching her with a look she had wanted from a man her whole life and never once gotten. Not threatened. Proud. A man who had finally met his equal and was delighted by it rather than diminished. They argued still. They would always argue. The two of them. It was practically how they breathed. But the arguments were different now. No longer two strangers defending territory. Just two strong people who had chosen each other, working out how two strong people fit. He learned to ask instead of order. She learned to let someone and pass the brick. He brought her bitter coffee the way he liked it, and she pretended to hate it and drank all of it. She fell asleep on his shoulder on a plane, and he sat perfectly still for 9 hours, so as not to wake her, and his arm went completely numb, and he counted it the finest 9 hours he had ever spent. Somewhere over an ocean, watching her sleep, he understood that the loneliness was gone, not managed, not armored over, gone, and that the woman who had taken it from him had done it not by needing him, but by refusing to. He asked her in the garden, where it had all started, where his mother had once whispered for words to a stranger. There was no empty restaurant this time, no grand gesture, no helicopter, no diamond the size of a threat. He had learned her by now. He waited until an ordinary evening, the two of them doing nothing, and he simply took her hand and said the truest thing he had ever said. "My mother gave me a wife," he said. "I am asking for myself this time, with no one arranging anything and nothing to gain and no war to win, whether you would do me the impossible honor of marrying me. For real, because I want to, not because I have to. I have never in my life done something only because I wanted to. You are the first. I would like you to be all the rest of them too." Nellie, who had faced down a leadership council without blinking, found she could not speak. "You're asking," she finally managed. "I'm asking. You said you had earned being asked." "I did say that." So, for the first time since she had met him, Kong Min-jae looked genuinely, completely uncertain. A man who had laid down every weapon and stood unarmed in front of the one person who could hurt him. "Will you?" "Yes," Nellie said. "Obviously, yes. You are an impossible man, yes." And this time when he cupped her face in his hands, she did not stop him. They married for real in the spring. Not in secret, not as a weapon, not in front of wolves. In the garden, under the old trees, in front of the staff who had loved her and warned her, the cook's daughter scattering petals down the aisle with fierce concentration. There was no leadership council. There were no cameras hidden in the molding. There was only a small gathering of people who actually meant the smiles on their faces, which, for that family, was nothing short of a miracle. And in the front row, in a chair set close so she would not have to stand long, wrapped in a shawl against a spring that her body could no longer quite keep up with, sat Madame Kong. She had held on. The doctors were surprised. She had not been. She had simply decided she was not finished, that she had one more thing to see, and an old woman who had stayed 3 steps ahead of an entire crime family her whole life was not about to be outmaneuvered by her own failing heart before the one wedding she had actually arranged came true. She watched her son marry the woman she had chosen for him at a gala with 4 whispered words, and she watched the cold she had despaired of ever thawing melt completely off his face as he looked at his bride. And she watched Nellie, the brilliant, impossible stranger who had walked into a lion's den for a frightened mother and stayed for the lonely son, become, at last and for real, her daughter. When the vows were done and the kiss was given and the small crowd rose cheering, Nellie came to her first, before anyone, crossed the whole garden in her wedding dress and knelt down in the grass beside the old woman's chair and took both her hands the way the old woman had once taken hers. "You knew," Nellie said softly, "that first night. You weren't arranging a marriage at all, were you?" Madame Kong smiled, and for just a moment all the steel and all the strategy fell away, and she was simply a mother who had gotten the one thing she wanted before the end. "I was arranging a family," she said. "I only had to find the one person strong enough to be the center of it." She lifted one frail hand and laid it against Nellie's cheek. "I looked at you across that ballroom, my girl, and I knew. I am old. I have been wrong about many things." Her eyes, those measuring eyes, shone. "I was not wrong about you. Behind them, Min-jae came and stood with one hand on his wife's shoulder and one on his mother's. The three of them together in the spring light, and for the first time in the long and bloody history of the Kong family, the most powerful man in it was simply and completely happy. He had won back an empire, but the only thing he had ever actually wanted was kneeling in the grass in a white dress, holding his mother's hands, having walked into his life as a stranger and stayed as everything. At some point, he had stopped pretending, and she had stopped first. That's the story, all the way to the end. If it moved you, if you smiled, if you stayed for every minute of it, please hit that like button, subscribe with the bell on, and leave me a comment telling me your favorite moment, the dinner, the shirt, the summit, the garden, all of it. Tell me, did you see the mother's real plan coming from the very first whisper? I read every single comment. Thank you for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next one.